Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Leibowitz. Well, we've been doing a series on the heroes and villains of philosophy, and today's guest has been kind enough to keep us going through this. He's an objectivist philosopher who received his PhD in philosophy from City University, New York. He taught for many years at Marist College, and he is the author of numerous books, including Heroes, Legends, Champions, Why Heroism Matters. Professor Andrew Bernstein, welcome back.
Thanks, Michael. It's good to be back. And since you spoke of
Oh,
it,
look at that.
I just happened to have a copy here by
That's
by
wonderful.
chance.
Awesome.
It's available from Amazon.
Okay.
It's good to be back, Michael. It's been a fun discussion of the history of philosophy.
I'm loving it. So I think we left off, and the first philosopher we'll get to today is the British philosopher John Locke. So without further ado, take us away.
All right. Locke is he's English, like you said. He's his dates were 1632 to 1704. He's one of the great political philosophers in history. Certainly had a major impact on the American founders. So he's a hero. I think he's a mixed case, but largely a hero. When we discuss heroes in philosophy, of course, what we mean by this are their ideas basically life supporting and promote human life, or are they life harming and harm human life? I think Locke is a very positive figure. Now, before we get to politics, Michael, we should discuss epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy that studies how human beings gain knowledge. And Locke's a thoroughgoing empiricist, meaning empiricism, is a theory of knowledge that claims all knowledge originates in sense experience. All knowledge originates in observation. And it was an essay concerning human understanding, I think, was the title of Locke's major work in epistemology. But we discussed Descartes in our last episode, and Descartes was a rationalist, meaning sense experience is not all that important. Gaining knowledge, we gain knowledge. And Descartes was a great geometer, let's not forget. So we gain knowledge by deducing conclusions from basic axioms. And Descartes believed in innate ideas. He was a devout Catholic. Innate ideas meaning that we're born with certain ideas buried in our minds somewhere, and planted, according to Descartes, in our minds by God. Now Locke refutes this brilliantly, and there's a parallel here between Plato and Aristotle in the ancient world and Descartes and Locke in the early modern world. Locke refutes Descartes' theory of innate ideas much the same way that Aristotle had refuted Plato's. And Locke proceeds to do this by showing that any idea that we can mention, no matter how complex or even fictional, can be explained by the mind's ability to take the data of observation and then combine or rearrange it into new forms. So, for instance, we take a complex concept like marriage, let's say, which involves many elements. Locke says, well, we can observe a man, we could observe a woman, we could observe, love making, we could observe the conception of a childbearing and child rearing, we could observe, the financial arrangements between husband and wife, and so many other things, and we could combine all of this into the very complex idea of marriage. And the legal aspect of it, as well, and many other features of a marriage. But even take a fictional ideal, a mythical ideal like a centaur. The mythical being, which is supposedly half man and half horse. I know some people, I think the horse part predominated the man part, at least in terms of what went on, between their ears. But some of them, unfortunately, a lot of them are in politics, and on both sides of the aisle. But the Locke says, the mind. We've observed men, we've observed horses, and the mind has a creative faculty. It can combine these into a new idea. It's fictional, but this is how the mind operates. Excuse me. So Locke says there aren't any ideas that the human mind conceives that can't be explained by reference to observation and the combination and rearrangement of observed facts. We don't. There's no need to appeal to God, or the implanting in our minds of innate ideas. And so Locke's theory of knowledge is much more inductive, like Aristotle, than it is deductive. That is, inductive means we start with observed facts, and then we formulate principles based on observation.
Right.
The example I use in logic class is very simple. All cats are carnivores. All lions are cats, therefore all lions are carnivores. That's a valid deduction. The conclusion follows necessarily from the premises. But how do we know the premises are true? All cats are carnivores. Well, we're not born, Aristotle and Locke agree, we're not born knowing this kind of stuff. This requires observation. And in some cases, probably unfortunate observations, like saber-toothed tigers are cats. And Nanook the caveman went out one day and didn't come back.
What did you call him, Nanook?
No, yeah, I just made up a name. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn.
I like that name. So Locke used the term to describe what you're talking about, tabula rasa, right? Meaning blank slate. Now, I've had some discussions about this with people, because in my view, when somebody says that the human mind is born tabula rasa, it means without ideas, without knowledge, conceptual knowledge. It's not an argument saying it's born without the capacity to learn language, or there's no what's the word I'm looking for? No tendencies and no reflexes.
No abilities or anything like that.
Yeah, it just has to do with there is no innate conceptual knowledge. Am I correct that that's what he's referring to, and much later what Ayn Rand would be referring to?
Absolutely. That's Aristotle, that's Locke, that's Rand, that the mind, these thinkers who claim that all knowledge originates in observation are not claiming that the mind has no abilities. There's no innate ideas. There's no knowledge that we're born with. There's certainly no evidence to support the claim that there's knowledge that we're born with. I mean, Descartes, a great geometer, I don't think he ever observed any baby come crawling out of the womb, spouting off geometrical propositions, or anything else for that matter. But anyhow, go back to my example. Nanook the caveman went out and didn't come back one day, and they found his skeleton having been eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, and they start gaining experience, start gaining observational data that they didn't know that tigers were cats back then. But eventually they learned that also through experience, and that cats are meat eaters, and you and I are meat, so the big cats are dangerous. And so all knowledge originates in observation. This, I think, Locke establishes this point very, very effectively, and it has political consequences. It has very, very benign political consequences in contrast to the Platonic Cartesian view. Cartesian is just taking Descartes' name and making it into an adjective. Maybe we should go back a little bit, Michael, because we discussed that. In the Platonic Cartesian view, knowledge is derived from a transcendent world.
Yeah.
Well, who studies a transcendent world?
Plato and Descartes.
Yeah, exactly. Not every man and every woman. And Plato is very famous for this. The philosopher king theory in the Republic. Only the philosophers. Philosophy means love of wisdom, and the lovers of wisdom, rather than the lovers of power or pleasure or money, they study the higher world. Well, then they know they have much greater wisdom than we do, including of moral and political principles. And so if the government on earth is going to be morally upright, it has to be run by the philosophers, those who best know what it means to be moral. And so, the idea of a philosopher king, a top-down command system in which to go. Let's put it this way. The conceit has always been, going back to Plato, that the educated elite know what's best for me better than I do. And consequently, my life should be governed by them. It's in my self-interest for my life to be governed by them because they know what's good. I don't. Plato's description of democracy, meaning by any type of political freedom, was a system which permits each man to go to the devil in his own way. You know, so I think Plato means the drug addicts are free to kill themselves on drugs, and the boozers are free to kill themselves on booze, and so on. So, you know, on that transcendent theory of knowledge, where it's gained from a higher world, and observation has very little, you know, a little bit to do with it, but not much. The political ramifications are, you know, you have a dictatorship of the intellectual and moral elite. Whereas on Locke's view and Aristotle's, if knowledge is gained from observation, then every man and every woman have the capacity to gain knowledge and gain wisdom, because they're dealing with the observable world every day. They're making a living, they're raising their kids, they're repairing their home or plowing their fields or whatever it is. They know observable facts, presumably better than the philosophers do, who are busy studying the transcendent world. Well, you know, if every man and every woman are rational beings in that way, capable of gaining knowledge, then they're capable of being self-governing. They can govern their own lives. They don't need the wise rulers of the state to dictate to them what's best for them and their children. And, you know, rational beings, and by rational, I think we mean here what Aristotle means, or something, Locke means something very similar. That knowledge is gained by logical, non-contradictory thinking about observed facts. The observed facts are critical here. If that's what it means to gain knowledge and by extension to gain wisdom, every man and every woman can do it, and consequently they could be self-governing beings. And so you see Locke's move from an empirical epistemology into a politics of freedom.
Okay, before we get to the politics, Locke, correct me if I'm wrong, was in addition to being an empiricist, was also an associationist, right?
Depends what you mean by that.
Well, he believed that the association of ideas is how we learn. I don't know. I wanted you to explain it because I don't fully grasp it, to be perfectly honest with you. But he believed that we come to learn by associating different ideas together, or associating them with reality or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm just.
Yeah, I think I get your drift here. Here's the problem with Locke, with his epistemology, with his theory of knowledge, as I see it, and that is, like Descartes, he accepts both the causal and the representative theories of knowledge.
Okay.
And I think this is where the problem comes in. The causal theory of knowledge claims that reality causes the ideas that we have in our minds, but the ideas in our minds are not of those objects. So I'm looking at the table across the room here, and according to Locke, I don't know the table itself. I know the perception or the idea in my mind of the table.
Okay.
And then the table causes it, but we're divorced from reality in that way. We know the idea in our mind, not the object that causes it. Now, connected with that, he holds what's known as the representative theory of knowledge, which is that these ideas in our mind represent the objects. That is, they're good likenesses of them, the way, Gilbert Stuart's famous portrait of George Washington, presumably a good likeness of Washington. You see the problem there. Since we don't know the objects, only the ideas in our mind, how would we know that they're a good representation of the object?
We couldn't, yeah.
No, we couldn't. We couldn't. And so Locke, despite his leanings towards objectivity and observation of the objective world, Locke ends up in part as a subjectivist in that regard. We're locked, if I could use the phrase locked away in our minds without any cognitive access to the to nature. So there's a real problem that Locke initiates in epistemology.
So would you say that was his biggest weakness? Because you said he was a mixed case.
Yeah.
Is that the point at which he hits his low?
I think so. Yeah, that is his nadir. I think that's his low point. He's a curious mixture in that regard of he's part Aristotelian and part Cartesian. He agrees with Descartes on these last points.
Okay, so you were getting to his political theory, which in my view, is monumental. And some people argue that his influence on the founders of the United States wasn't as big as some might think. I tend to disagree. I think he had a profound impact, especially on Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence and on the founders' view of property. So what exactly is Locke's contribution? Where is he new? What does he bring into the table? Why is it good?
Yeah, before I answer that, Michael, my good friend Bradley Thompson just a couple of years ago published a book, a great book, and so I can't remember the title, but it's Brad Thompson's most recent full length book, and really explores Locke's influence on the founders, and
Really?
shows how
Okay.
shows how strong it is. Which I get the spirit of the American Revolution, or it's something like that. But anyhow, Locke publishes two treatises of civil government, 1688, 1690, somewhere in that range, late 17th century. And in the second treatise of civil government, Locke very famously and influentially argues that individuals are endowed with certain inalienable, I think he says unalienable, inalienable rights, which include life, liberty, and property, which, as you pointed out, Jefferson, almost verbatim, 80 odd years later, writes in the Declaration of Independence, the individuals have inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, inalienable, first of all, we need to define a lot of these terms. Inalienable means it can't be alienated, can't be estranged or divorced from me. It's mine by birthright, by virtue of being a human being. I'll give you an example. A few years ago in class, a kid said to me, or she said to the whole class, she said, in many parts of the world, women don't have any rights. And I said to her, as a good Lockean, I said, no, all over the world, women have rights. They have rights simply by virtue of being human beings. You mean in many parts of the world, those rights are not recognized, they're not respected, and they're not protected. So I use the example, and kids are looking at me, I use the example, in Afghanistan, for instance, the Taliban are so brutal and backwards. They'll murder a woman, because she wants to get an education. And they're all horrified, right? Why are we horrified? Well, because she does morally have the right to pursue an education if that's what she chooses. That's her right as a human being. And, the kids get it, that very often these rights are abrogated. But the rights are inalienable. They can't be divorced from us. So this is a huge step forward, that prior to this, I mean, this idea of personal liberty and individual rights is germinating in Britain of his day, 17th century. But Locke codifies it into a formal political theory that that individual's life, to put it simply, your life belongs to you. It doesn't belong to the king, or the feudal aristocracy, or the church, or whatever. Your life belongs to you. It's yours. You have certain inalienable rights. Life, liberty, and property. I think Locke means life, liberty, and the right to work hard and earn and own.
Well, yeah, because he describes the origination of property. It's not, and you actually have to apply your labor. You don't just give me what I want. I have a right to it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you're right, Michael. Locke gives the classic defense of private property rights, which is still, used to this day. And that is that if you, as he puts it, if you mix your labor with the raw materials of nature, the resulting product is and should properly be yours. So, simple example I always use is, I'll pick out some kid in class and I'll say, Joe here and his family, go into the wilderness and they chop down some trees and they plane the trees down and they do the architectural work, design a log cabin, and then they build the cabin. There's a lot of work, The cabin should, belong to them, right? And again, the kids all agree. And then along I come, Bernstein the raider with his boys armed to the teeth.
Maybe with Nanook.
Yeah, with Nanook, yeah. With Nanook and his brothers. And I said, thanks, Joe. Thanks for building this cabin for me and my boys. And Joe and his family said, we didn't build it for you. It's ours. We put in all the sweat equity here, if I could quote the great Jerry Rice, great football player. We put in all this intellectual work to design the cabin and the physical work of chopping down the trees and everything's ours. And I raised, my AK and I pointed at his chest and I said, "Oh, really?" And so I plunder it, I raid it, I steal it. Well, you see, Locke's point, of course, is I'm wrong here, and Joe and his family are right. They built it. They mixed their labor with the raw materials of nature. The cabin properly belongs to them, and that's why theft, which I'm guilty of in this case, is wrong. It's morally wrong. He gives a brilliant defense of private property rights. That needs to be fleshed out, but he provides a brilliant basis for
it. I think that it's absolutely revolutionary. His idea of life, liberty, and property as rights that we have by virtue of being human, and that the only proper purpose of government is to protect those rights, are great. Two areas where I have an issue with his rights theory. One is the idea that rights come from God. Now, look at it. It's like you said, it's 1680s. You know what I mean? I can understand it, but it's still nonetheless, I believe, it is an unnecessary inaccuracy. But the other problem is the Lockean proviso, the idea that you can only accumulate rightfully enough land as you're going to use, or as much property as you're going to use. Because I think that sets up later on down the line, we'll get to, some of the Marxist ideas of property and surplus wealth or whatever. I forget the terms he uses. But what do you think about those things? The rights coming from God and the Lockean proviso.
No, I agree with you 100% on everything you just said. I think Locke is revolutionary. I think he's enormously positive. Also, 17th century context. Christianity is, a very powerful force in the Western world at that time. Locke is, when I teach Locke, I always teach him. He's a little bit like Thomas Aquinas in a way. He's like he's part Aristotelian and he's part Christian. It is understandable in the 17th century, but it's still an error.
Sure.
It's very difficult to show that rights are based in the requirements of human life. That's not done for more than 300 years following, or 200 or some odd years following, it's close to 300 years following, by Ayn Rand in Atlas Shrugged and in her nonfiction, The Virtue of Selfishness. So I don't want to criticize Locke for not. He's so far ahead of his time. I don't want to criticize him if I'm saying, well, you're not far enough ahead of your time. But he was mistaken. The Lockean proviso, that is a worse error, I think, in the cultural context, because it in effect it empowers the government to say, well, you have enough land, you have enough wealth, you have enough money in the bank, whatever it is, you don't need more than this, and whatever you produce, then we'll take it, we'll relieve you of it, and we'll distribute it as we see fit. It's the idea that somebody has enough. It's subjective. It's completely it's a mushy. First of all, it's a mushy term. Who defines what's enough? Who defines that? If not the person himself, well, the answer that's most likely going to be given is, well, the state will define that and will redistribute the so-called excess wealth, that you create or own. It's a move from the laissez-faire system that Locke primarily supports towards socialism and statism. And it's very, 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 it's mistaken. It's very harmful.
All right. So what else do you think we need to cover on Locke before we get to your next guy?
The next guy. I think that pretty much covers the waterfront. I just want to say before we leave Locke, maybe when you put up the show notes, you could, I could send you. I'll get the title of Brad Thompson's recent book, and maybe you could put it in there, because for anybody who's interested in Locke's influence on the American founders, Brad Thompson's book is brilliant.
All right, we'll be there. Send me the email and I'll get it there. So Locke, we're in
Great,
agreement,
thank you.
is a hero.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And before we leave Locke, maybe we should just point out briefly a little more of the influence on the American founders and the
Okay.
relationship with the American founders. Because Locke dies in 1704. Benjamin Franklin's born across the pond in 1706, just 2 years after Locke's death. He was the oldest, of the major founders. And I think Locke wanted to limit the power of the government. Definitely wanted to limit the power of the government. And here he's writing polemically, at least in part, against Thomas Hobbes, who was early a contemporary of his. And Hobbes, who thought human beings are driven by our urges and impulses and everything, are basically whim-driven, destructive creatures. We needed the all-powerful dictator to ram war and order down our throats. Now Locke disagrees. Locke's theory we saw is the human beings are not generally driven by their impulses, but they're rational beings, and they're better off governing themselves and being dictated to by some political strongman. And so Locke's theory is known as limited government. We want a government, life in the state of nature, as they put it, in the absence of a government, we're prone to, susceptible to criminals and so on and so forth. But if I could update Locke on this, he's prescient. The dictator is much more dangerous to us than any private criminal. Now, neither he nor Hobbes, lived to see the 20th century of Hitler, Stalin, Mao, murderers like that. But they knew there were kings who were tyrants and such. And I think Locke's point is this: a private criminal you can deal with a private criminal even in a state of nature, even without any government. Because what does he got with his gang? 500 guys or 1,000 guys? Well, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of honest people in society. If they've had it finally up to here with the criminals' depredations, they all get together, thousands of them, and march on the criminals' headquarters with torches and pitchforks, and they pull the guy apart bone by bone. So even in a state of nature, you can deal with nasty criminals, with dangerous criminals. Furthermore, if you have a limited government, then the criminal ability to impose, to victimize innocent people is opposed by the criminal justice system. He's limited in the power he has because he's going, he's got in the United States today, if we update this, he's got, the Department of Justice after him, or whatever. So he's limited in the pain and the harm he can inflict. But the government, a dictator, he is the state. He controls the police force. He controls the court system. He controls the prison system. He controls the military. He comes at you with the full power of the state behind him. And it's very difficult to defend yourself. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult, much more difficult to defend yourself against a dictator than it is against any private criminals. So, Locke's right on this, that the power of the state is the main danger here to our lives and our rights, not the power of some other private individuals, even criminals like terrible criminals like the drug cartels who are really violent. So Locke is prescient and he wants to limit the power of the state, but he wants to limit the power of the state to three basic functions. You have a criminal justice system to protect honest people from bad guys. Have a civil court system to adjudicate honest, legitimate disputes between and amongst honest persons, and have a volunteer military to defend the country against foreign invaders or foreign bad guys. And that's it. Those are the functions of the government. But I don't think he knows how to do this legally. It's the genius of the American founders that put this into, operation. James Madison gets a lot of credit. How do we limit the power of the state? Of course, we have a system of checks and balances that's brilliantly conceived, by Madison in the U.S. Constitution. But above all, you have a written constitution with a Bill of Rights, which is the basic law of the land. So freedom of speech is under fire today. It's terrifying to me, but freedom of religion, right in the First Amendment, both of them. That these are the basic law of the land, and the government has got to abide by it. And the U.S. government did until very recently. When the Biden administration it was a division of governance board on disinformation at Homeland Security. Ministry of Truth.
Well, Professor Bernstein, up until right now, I think I've agreed with every word you've uttered. And I don't disagree with you about the Biden administration. I just disagree that it's a recent phenomenon. I mean, what was it, 1798, when Adams is signing into law the Alien and Sedition Acts, where they're already cutting down on free speech. I mean, in the first administration, they were already violating the Constitution with a national bank. So it's not just, the government almost immediately started violating the contract, or however you want to view the Constitution. It's not to take away from Biden's sins. I'm not defending Joe Biden by any stretch of the imagination.
No, but it's in recent years with cancel culture and now we see the government imposing censorship. The FBI coaching.
Well, sure, they were telling the social media what to do, all kinds of horrible things.
Coaching Twitter and
I agree. That's all terrible stuff.
Yeah, it's all censorship for the most part. I think we say until recently, the U.S. government generally protected freedom of speech. My point is this: the American founders identified how to put Locke's theoretical principles into practice, how to establish a limited government that protects the rights of individuals rather than violates them. And I think the American experiment in Republican government shows the dangers. No matter how brilliant the Constitution is and the Bill of Rights, it can't survive the rise of irrational philosophy in the society, which we're going to discuss as we move ahead.
I learned this lesson when I was in prison. I was part of a program called the Alternative to Violence Project, and I was an inmate facilitator. And I felt that as inmate facilitators representing this program, we should have higher standards of conduct for ourselves, because the inmates that would take the program look to us. And if we're hypocrites, then everything we say falls on deaf ears. And I came up with the idea, what we need is a code of morality for the group, a code of ethics. And what I didn't grasp is you can't dictate that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. I mean, it works if people want to live that way and want to live by a constitution. But if the public doesn't have the character and doesn't have the rationality for it, then all the rules and regulations will just never, ever cut it. And
exactly. If Christianity religion becomes the dominant philosophy in a society, then the powers that be, the politicians and so forth, they're going to look for ways to pass laws that violate the right to abortion or whatever it is, or individuals' rights to gay individuals' rights to marry, or they'll find loopholes. They ban the teaching of evolution in the public schools in the Bible Belt for decades. And similarly, from the other direction, if Marxism becomes a dominant philosophy in a society, then the politicians and the voters who support it, will find loopholes to impose social welfare programs, to coercively redistribute wealth, to impose cancel culture on anybody who disagrees with communism, and so forth. So it's a brilliant constitution. The Bill of Rights is brilliant, but it requires the 18th century Enlightenment philosophy, and I think Ayn Rand's development of that philosophy in order for that kind of government, in order for that kind of political system to flourish.
Yes,
but Locke, nevertheless, before we get to Hume, they say mankind advances in baby steps. This was more than a baby step. I think Locke and Locke's political theories and the American founders' application of those theories are a gigantic step forward in the battle for human liberty.
He might have been the original Neil Armstrong, right? One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Yeah,
Yes,
I agree. I'm a big fan of John Locke. The second treatise on government I thought was phenomenal. His letter
yes.
concerning toleration I thought was good too. I've just never studied his epistemology. I never really cared too much about it. His politics I thought was where it's at. But our next guy is a guy whose epistemology I think you're definitely going to have something to say about. Tell us about Mr. Hume.
David Hume, Scottish, was his date 1711 to 1776. So he's 18th century, and Hume also a strict empiricist. Knowledge originates with sense experience. The problem with Hume is knowledge begins and ends with sense experience. He claims that the only things we know, what he calls impressions and ideas. Impressions are immediate observations or bodily sensations. If I could bring up a painful one like a toothache, those actually, yeah. I was going to go into some romantic sensations, but let's just avoid that. But they're
Not
good,
that
right?
kind of show, folks.
Yeah. But we can say they're good, right?
They're good.
But
Yes.
yeah, they're good. We can say that much. And ideas are simply kind of tepid reflections on the on the impressions. They're simply reflections. They're reflections on the impressions by the mind, and that's what we know. Impressions and ideas of them. So, where you see where this leads Hume in relentless logic, and he's famous for his critique of causality. That A causes B. And I think we should do a few examples of what how Hume applies his basic epistemology, that all we know are what he calls impressions and ideas.
So hold
First
on
one
one
is,
second. I just want to ask you his basic idea, right? Is that no matter how many times event B follows event A, you can never ever conclude that A causes B. Right.
correct.
That's his basic thing. That all we know is that it happens to follow. We can never know that there's causality. That's like the simplest way that I know how to state it. Okay, so go ahead and give some good examples of this.
Yeah, and accurate. That's accurate. Uh, so we stick our hand in a fire and we get burned. Don't try this at home, folks. This is a thought experiment. We stick our hand in a fire, we get burned. So, event A is we stick our hand in the fire. Event B is we get burned. And Hume says, in order to establish a causal relationship between A and B, one, there has to be, contiguity. The two have to, come together. But two, there also has to be what he calls necessary connection. So there is spatial and temporal contiguity in my example. A comes first, B follows A in time, and the hand and the fire are in physical contact, so they are contiguous. So, they do touch, or meet. But the necessary connection, that there's any necessity here that B must follow A. Hume says, I have no impression of that. I have no direct experience of it. I could see some idiot sticking his hand in the fire, and I could see him getting burned. But I don't see the must, I don't see or taste or touch it. Where's the must? Where's the necessity? There's no observational evidence for that. And so Hume concludes that we believe in, this is one example, we can multiply it a million times, but you and I, human beings, believe in causation or causality as a convenience. It enables us to order our experience, with some degree of precision, and we can make predictions. So it's convenient for us to believe that if we plant in the spring, then we can harvest in the fall. It enables us to order our experience. So for human, belief in causation is a convenience. It has utilitarian value in our lives. It's true by it's a psychological convention. It's true by convention. It's a psychological what's the word here? I forget the word he uses, but it's a psychological mechanism by means of which we can make sense out of the teeming diversity and variety of experience. That we believe the universe is ordered in these causal patterns that therefore we can predict. We can predict, in summer it's going to be hot, and in winter it's going to be cold, and so on. And if we believe that day after day after day, as in the past, the sun will continue to rise in the east, we can make plans on what we're going to do, in the daytime when the sun is up, and so on and so forth. So it's a psychological convenience. It's convention is true by custom. He says it's a customary belief.
Now, if he's right, there'd be no way for us to act at all. I mean, if cause and effect don't actually exist, then I could be sitting here, the microphone jumps up, hits me in the face, the light goes flying. I mean, anything's possible. It's deuce is wild, right?
Right. Anything, and that all of that is possible. Hume says we have no reason to believe that won't happen later today or at some point, tomorrow or some point in the future. It's never happened in the past. That doesn't tell us what's going to happen in the future.
So in his epistemology, he severs cause from effect, which is dangerous, extremely. But he also severs is from ought. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah. Yes. This is Hume's moral theory. And Hume said, and Hume's very famous on this. So what is the good? This is the question of moral philosophy. It has been going back at least as far as Socrates. What is the good? How do we know it? So, example I always use, simple example I always use is most of us believe that working hard and honestly and supporting ourselves by honest effort is good. Well, what makes it good? Hume says, I could see this guy working hard and sweating and everything. I could see him getting paid. I could see him putting money in the bank. I could see him, observe him paying his bills and everything. But where is the good? I can't touch it. I can't see it. I can't smell it. There's no observational data that this is good. There's no, and if there's no factual basis then for claiming that that X, in this case, you're working hard and supporting yourself honestly. There's no factual basis for claiming that this is good. It's simply a customary belief. Hume raises the question: can we derive an ought proposition from an is proposition? That is, can we get values from facts? Are our value judgments based in facts? Is it good to work hard, support yourself honestly? Well, Hume said, well, there's no observational data for that. There's no observed datum of good here. So it's true simply because it's true because of other considerations. Generally, he believes that emotionally, people express when they say X is good, like in my example, for instance, they're expressing an emotional preference for X. That's the way they feel. There's no factual basis for it. So can we derive values from facts or value judgments from facts? No. Can we get an ought or a should proposition from an is proposition? No. There's no factual basis for this.
So he's a subjectivist ultimately when it comes to epistemology, and a relativist when it comes to ethics. He severs cause from effect, is from ought, and ultimately sets the stage for Kant by waking Kant from his dogmatic slumbers, right?
Absolutely right.
So we have to conclude, right, that Hume is a villain.
Yes, Hume. Yes, and it's unfortunate because do we have any time left?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. It's unfortunate because of Hume's virtues, and we should point this out. First of all, he was known as a really good-natured guy. He was very friendly and good-natured and everything, very affable. He worked hard to develop himself into a very good writer. His histories are I think are very good. He's a brilliant polemicist against religion. he develops. What was it? Once I hit 70, guys, my short-term memory started to go. But his dialogues concerning natural religion, is that the name? I think so. He develops maybe the best version of the design argument, for God's existence, namely, that if you take a human mechanism that's brilliantly designed, let me update it. Let's say, German engineering got a Mercedes, it's brilliantly designed and argues for the intelligence of the designer. Therefore, the complexity of the natural universe and how it runs in, mathematical harmony is an argument for the intelligent designer. Hume gives the most best version of the design argument, and then he destroys it. He's a brilliant polemicist against religion. His best friend was Adam Smith, and Hume was a strong believer in free markets and political freedom. There's a lot of virtues in David Hume, but his theoretical philosophy is a disaster. It is an absolute disaster. He even says somewhere in his writings, he says, I spend the day writing, then I go out with my buddies at night.
Yeah, I was going to mention this.
And he said, we eat well, we drink well, we play backgammon, we're having fun and everything, living large. And I come home late at night and I read what I've written, and then I go, God, that's bizarre. It's just so strange, but I don't see any theoretical way to refute it. So it's like he himself recognized that his theories are crazed, but he couldn't see, the theory that would, establish it as false. So there's a lot of virtues in Hume, but yeah, his theoretical philosophy, both in epistemology and in ethics, is terrible. It's very harmful.
Okay, well, we've made it through another episode. Do you have anything else you need to add?
Well, you already said this sets the stage for Kant. And Kant, you quoted Kant from the Critique of Pure Reason, where he said reading Hume awakened him from his dogmatic slumbers. And in our next episode, we'll see exactly what Kant meant by that.
Yeah. Critique of Pure Reason, I think, is the hardest book I've ever read in my life. Followed by, I think, Keynes' General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. I mean, it's just insane trying to read through this stuff. And it's probably, a lot of obfuscation by intent. I don't know how to.
Well, you're obviously an intelligent guy and a major reader, because you're talking about difficult material. Again, I would say don't try this at home, but Hegel's phenomenology of spirit or phenomenology of mind, depending on translation, I think is even more difficult.
Yeah, I've never tried it. I read where Friedrich Hayek said, "I don't pretend to understand Hegel," and I said, "Well, if Hayek can't understand Hegel and he actually speaks the language, what chance do I got of understanding a translation?"
Yeah, well, two quick points on Hegel, Michael. Ayn Rand said somewhere that nobody's actually ever read Hegel. She said a lot of people have looked at all the words on the page, but if reading involves getting some understanding from it, then nobody's ever read Hegel. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And secondly, what I've heard in Germany, native-born German speakers who are, that's German's their mother tongue, and they're in graduate school studying philosophy, that they very often will read Hegel in English translation rather than in German. They'll read him in translation rather than in their mother tongue, because the English translators are trying to, make sense out of Hegel. So that's astounding. That's true. That is astounding.
Okay, so where can they find you? Where can the people find you?
Well, AndrewBernstein.net. That's my website, AndrewBernstein.net. You can find me on Facebook. Here's Heroes, Legends, Champions, Why Heroism Matters, available on Amazon. My novel.
Why don't you send me a link for that too, so I can put it up with the other link you're going to send?
Okay. All right. Yeah, I will. Thank you. My novel on race war reckoning is going to be out in a few weeks. It's Race War Comes to America. I feared it for a long time, and it's a brutal story, because it's about race war, but it's
all right. Well, once that comes out, you got to come on and talk about that too.
Oh yeah, sure. Great. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thank you. You're absolutely wonderful. Well, for now, this is the Rational Egoist. I'm Michael Leibowitz signing out. Remember, like, share, comment, subscribe. Till next time.